Properties of molecular compounds depend on the size and the shape of the molecules, and on polarity. Highly polar molecules have strong interactions with each other and behave similarly to ionic compounds. Lesser nonpolar molecules behave differently. Basically, the higher the electronegativity, the more similarly to ionic compounds the polar molecules behave. Properties such as the state, temperature, melting point, and solubility depend on polarity. Number 1. State and temperature. If the molecules are polar, intermolecular forces hold particles together as liquids or solids. If they are nonpolar or weakly polar, such as diatomic elements, the forces hold particles together as gases, for example, hydrogen. 2. The melting or boiling point also depends on polarity. The energy that separates molecules depends on the strength of intermolecular forces. The stronger they are, the more energy is required, which results in a higher melting or boiling point. 3. Variable solubility. Polar solutes dissolve in polar solvents, and nonpolar solutes dissolve in nonpolar solvents. For example, sugar, which is a polar solute, dissolves in water, a polar solvent. Molecular compounds are poor electrical conductors because they do not readily produce ions in solutions. They have high variable properties. Their atoms can be linked in seemingly infinite combinations. Some can be simple and small, such as carbon dioxide. Others can be large with complex three-dimensional shapes and distinct regions with different characteristics, like glucose.
So molecules and molecular compounds, how are those melting points and boiling points of molecular compounds different from those of ionic compounds? If you study this chart, notice that NaCl is your ionic compound and H2O is your molecular compound. Notice the melting point for the ionic compound, NaCl, is quite high. That attraction between sodium ions and chloride ions is quite strong, and it takes a lot of energy to break it. Its boiling point is even higher. Boiling point is when a liquid changes to a gas. Notice for water is at 100 degrees Celsius, easy to obtain in our homes and in our lab. Some properties of molecular compounds. They tend to have relatively low melting and boiling points, and lower than your ionic compounds. Notice all that salt in that picture, isn't it great? So we have this array of ions when you have an ionic compound. It forms a crystal lattice, and we have a formula unit, and it's NaCl. In a molecular compound, which we're focusing on water right here, we have a molecule. So you can only have a molecule when you have covalent bonds, and our formula is H2O. Noble gases are not molecules, but just to let you know that they're monatomic and they exist as a single atom so that we can compare them to some other things. I'm going to leave it there. Covalent bond. A covalent bond is when atoms are held together by sharing of one or more pairs of electrons. And we'll be looking at this in a lot of detail. My favorite, the water molecule, hydrogen and oxygen share one pair between them. And this is a space-filling molecule and molecular model, and this is a ball and stick. Some more molecules. We have carbon monoxide, which is a C and an O. We have sulfur dioxide, which is SO2. We have carbon dioxide, CO2, which you know. So notice we're starting prefixes on some of the words. We only do that with molecules. Sulfur trioxide has sulfur with 3 oxygens, so it would be SO3. A molecular formula. It shows how many atoms of each element a molecule contains, and it's not always a low whole number ratio. So, some examples. We have methane, CH4. The next molecule is C2H6. Notice it's not the lowest whole number ratio, but this molecule is ethane. Our next one is C3H8, which is propane. In the lower corner, we have H2O2, hydrogen peroxide. H2O is water. So two very different molecules due to the number of bonds of hydrogens and oxygens, the number of atoms. Diatomic molecules. They're molecules that consist of two atoms, and you've seen Hinkelbroth on the wall in the classroom. All of those elements exist as diatomic molecules. So when you write hydrogen, it's H2. It's bonded with itself. Pure bromine is Br2. They do not exist as monatomic atoms. They're always bonded to themselves. They're molecules. Ammonia is another. So, some questions, and I already have the answer circled, unfortunately. So, compared to ionic compounds, molecular compounds tend to have relatively low melting points and low boiling. A molecular compound usually consists of, you can read the selections, and your proper answer should be 2 or more nonmetals. Our last question, a molecular formula shows and your selection, how many atoms